Ladies and gentlemen, classical family, it's your boy Giddy back with another reaction. Hope y'all are doing good. I'm doing great. Today we are learning something. So I guess this is for new classical music lovers. I know there are a lot of people that watch my channel that are also listening to classical music for the first time or are new to classical music like me. And yeah, I just jumped into classical music when I started, so I didn't really learn much about it, but I think it's important that we also kind of learn a bit about the history. And if somebody happens to stumble on my channel, I hope that, they can also learn a bit more about classical music, not only about the piece, but also like the different eras and everything. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoy the reaction, and I hope we learned something good. So yeah, there you go.
1000 AD, just because that's when people start to bother.
Let's go.
People start to bother writing things down. The guys that were interested in writing things down were the church, because they wanted to make sure everyone, sang from the same hymn sheet, as it were. At that time, what was sung in churches was a kind of chanting, which we know these days as plain chant. It sounds like this. They called it Gregorian chant, but apparently it was nothing to do with Pope Gregory, it just somehow got that name. There was this monk guy called Guido d'Arezzo who thought it would be good to have a bunch of lines, let's call it a stave or a staff, and you could then put your notes on that, so everyone will know which note to sing. Now, because it's for the church, the words are important, it's the word of God, the words are what we need to hear. So there's no need to put any rhythm in the notation, it's just pitches. The rhythm basically follows the stresses and the rhythms of the words. Some people have higher voices, some lower, so eventually the church says, okay, you can sing at a different pitch, a different interval, as long as you still sound the notes together. That sounded a little bit like this popular new instrument, the organ, so it's known as organum. They also thought sometimes it might be okay just to hold one note while the other note changed above. That was called drone organum, although more often the drone was just played on an instrument. Things didn't change very much for several centuries. Gradually over time the church allowed more and more intervals, the fifths, then the fourths, and eventually thirds, until the voices were able to move more or less independently. Many voices simultaneously is known in music as polyphony, and this was a fundamental change in the way music was made. Here's an example by Perotin of Notre Dame from around 1200. Things were now getting more complicated, so the notation needed to improve. Philip de Vitry, a French bishop and composer, wrote a famous book called The New Art, Ars Nova, as opposed to the Ars Antiqua of Guido d'Arezzo, and he came up with rhythmic notation ideas and the first time signatures. Using this system, Guillaume de Machaut became the first composer to set the entire Latin Mass in 1364. What's interesting about this early music is that to our modern ears it feels relatively static. It doesn't particularly travel from one place to another. It doesn't tend to reach a climax. Starting and stopping a piece seems more like tuning into a river of sound which is always there. By the middle of the 15th century it was the royal palaces and the aristocracy who were taking over as the most important influence on the course music took. Secular music began to influence church music and vice versa. As the Renaissance took hold, composers began to feel freer to express their own personalities more. Josquin des Prez was renowned in his day as a composer who brought new levels of expression to his music, particularly in the way he set a text. For example, he might illustrate a tear falling with a downward scale. Where words had always been the primary focus, now the music started to take centre stage. Other comparably great polyphonists included Palestrina in Italy, Orlando de Lassus in the Netherlands, and William Byrd in England. Around 1600, Italy became the centre of major new musical developments, as wealthy and cultured patrons oversaw a flourishing of the arts. The first treatises on musical notation and harmony were written in this period, and this is part of the reason why musical terms are still in Italian to this day. The wealth of the period led to larger ensembles and grander spectacles. Soon enough, the idea of opera was born. Monteverdi wasn't the first, but he was certainly the first great opera composer, and his operas like the 1607 Orfeo remain in regular performance to this day.
A name that I've heard before. Baroque is coming.
And out of opera came...
Before we continue, y'all know I don't pause a lot, but everything he has said up until now, I had no idea about. Like I know that when it comes to music and just singing in general, the church plays a huge role. Even growing up, like during my childhood, so my family's Christian, and we'll go to the church and you would sing a hymn or a chorus, but yeah, I think that's where I started. I wouldn't say hearing music, but hearing a different type of music other than like, hip hop, rap, and all those things. So, yeah, that was interesting, and it was also nice to see because then the church they had a choir where a group of people would be singing at the same time, and it was very fascinating because even the melody that a group of people could produce with their voice, back then as a child, I was like, it sounds cool, but even that had a name. So, and if you ask me, I don't know, but I don't know the name, but like everything had a term. But back then for me, everything was just like music and singing, and just yeah, singing in church sounded a bit different than the normal music I heard on the radio. So yeah, but hey, Baroque.
Two features which would dramatically affect the development of music across the continent. One was an increasingly dramatic style of music making, and two, a rise in the need for solo lines with accompaniment underneath. It was actually through instrumentalists imitating the vocal style of opera that the form known as the sonata first emerged, which went on to become one of the key forms of the next 200 years. With these developments, the Baroque era of Vivaldi, Bach and Handel was born. In Italy, the idea of having a soloist and an orchestral ensemble became popular and was called a concerto. Arcangelo Corelli developed the concerto grosso, where a group of solo string instruments alternate with the main body of the strings in a work.
Vivaldi.
Probably the greatest concerto writer of all was Vivaldi, who wrote over 500 in his lifetime.
500. Vivaldi was so talented, yo.
Before we go on, we need to take a brief musical detour to Germany to mention one of the most important composers in classical music history, which is J.S. Bach. His music seemed old-fashioned in its day. It was influenced by the contrapuntal school of organ writing by people like Pachelbel and Buxtehude. And it's interesting that Bach was one of the last great musicians to be employed by a church. Bach's music has this incredible technical brilliance. It's full of fugues and amazing counterpoints. But I think what makes it survive is this really sublime form of expression, which is both grand and humble at the same time. In France, it was another keyboard instrument, the harpsichord, that was most prominent, by composers like Couperin and Rameau, which was lighter in style than the German style. With later composers like Scarlatti and Telemann, you start to head towards what became known as the classical style, along with Bach's son, Carl Philipp Emanuel CPE Bach, who developed the idea of the sonata further. The sonata began now to take its familiar form of two contrasting subjects, which are then worked out in a development. This period coincides with the Age of Enlightenment, which was a philosophical movement dedicated to reason. And it's really interesting to think that the dialectical idea of having a debate between two different ideas, which then influence each other and eventually lead to a synthesis, is exactly mirrored in the form of the sonata. So if Italy had been the centre of music from, say, 1600 to 1750, from 1750 the capital moved to Vienna. It was the centre of the Habsburg Empire, who were great music lovers, and they invited Europe's finest musicians to come to court, so it really became a centre of great music making. Among them was Franz Joseph Haydn, who became known as the father of the symphony. He wrote 104 of them, as well as many great string quartets, solidifying the position of these two genres in the world of classical music. Mozart, of course, was another key classical composer. He wrote 41 symphonies, and in his last few he started to move beyond Haydn into a much more personal, searching kind of music, which precurses the Romantic style. So throughout all of this process from the Renaissance onwards, you have this sense of the individuality of the composer emerging more and more, as well as the sense of drama. Mozart pushed the drama in his operas to new heights, and in his last four in particular, you feel the human characters coming to life more than ever before. Beethoven started his career in the classical era, and his early works were influenced by Haydn, but gradually he started taking the traditional forms and stretching and distorting them. His last string quartets and piano sonatas seem to destroy the forms from within, works that are daring, disturbing and moving in equal measure. Beethoven was a whole new breed of artist, the lone genius, who through sheer force of will changed the world's idea of what music should be.
The goat. The Beethoven.
His 9 symphonies were such a towering achievement that forever after composers felt intimidated and few attempted to write more than that number. After Beethoven, composers started to take on a much more individual personality, and the pace of change in musical style quickens tremendously. As the Industrial Revolution took hold, orchestras grew larger and the technical standards of instruments improved. The newly perfected pianoforte took centre stage among many composer-performers of the Romantic era, like Chopin, Schumann, Mendelssohn and Liszt, or was used to accompany the voice in the glorious song cycles of Schubert. In the second half of the 19th century, Liszt and Berlioz continued the lust for experimentation. Berlioz in the field of colour and orchestration, and Liszt in harmonies that look forward to Bartók and Debussy. Perhaps the quintessential Romantic composer was Richard Wagner, who was an over-the-top figure who wrote over-the-top pieces.
Wagner's loud.
His most famous work is The Ring of the Nibelungen, which is a cycle of 4 operas usually performed over 4 nights. He wanted to control every aspect of the opera, so it was a whole vision and music drama. At the same time, Brahms was a much more classical romantic. He looked back to Beethoven and was one of the few composers able to ignore Wagner, both in terms of the genres he chose and in terms of the style. The end of the 19th century became quite a nationalistic period. You have Verdi in Italy writing an amazing string of operas which sometimes have strongly nationalistic themes. There was a strong group of Russian composers like Rimsky-Korsakov, who were known as the Mighty Five, although probably the most successful Russian, Tchaikovsky, was less interested in the nationalistic aspects. His style is a bit more German. You also have Dvorak in Bohemia, Sibelius in Finland, Grieg in Norway. So ever since the simplicity of the classical period, there had been a gradual increase in chromaticism and in dissonance in music. And as the 20th century commenced, there was a sense that things were about to change. Debussy looked to new scales and modes like the whole tone scale to find fresh sounds. Stravinsky, in his groundbreaking ballets like Petrushka and The Rite of Spring, found whole new ways of dealing with rhythm. The second Viennese school of Schoenberg, Berg and Webern sought new ways of organising sounds without a tonic key. So-called atonal music was born. Since this time, it's become much more difficult to discern an overall style or type of music, and vastly different approaches are all lumped together as modern music. One of the most successful and popular styles in the second half of the 20th century was minimalism. Composers like Steve Reich, John Adams and Philip Glass are among the most regularly performed composers of the modern era. So if you know anyone you think might find this interesting, do please share it with them. What did you think of my very brief history? Did I miss anyone out? Let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks very much for watching. Do hit the subscribe and the like button, maybe even that little bell which gives you email notifications.
Yeah.
I'll see you next time.
Hey, W-Bit, I appreciate it. Shout out to him. Very, very educational and informative. You say informative? Huh? But yeah, shout out to him. Very, very good video, very educational. I didn't see my boy Rach on there, but he did say that, obviously there's so many great composers, you can't put all of them in 10 minutes of a video, but still amazing video. Yeah, classical music has really defined music in general. I feel like back then the passion for music was way more, extremely way more than it is today. Nowadays with the music that we have, yeah, people enjoy music, but I feel like humans have learned how to enjoy short form music and even short form content. So it's really difficult for somebody to sit down and listen to, let me say, a classical piece that even goes over 10 minutes. So yeah, I feel like back then the passion for music, it was just, yeah, incredible. And I think what I'm kind of missing in today's, I would say in today's world, maybe, or in the century that we are in now, it's just the attention for new classical composers. That's something that, ever since I started like getting into classical music, I haven't really heard anything about modern composers. Yes, there have been some names that have been mentioned by the classical fan, but like compared to back then, all these composers that we've seen now, I don't think we're ever gonna get a composer like, let me say, Mozart. And even if we do, we'll probably not even hear of him, you know, because just the attention and the love for classical music, sadly, it's not there. And there might be a Mozart somewhere, but we'll probably never even find out. So that's a sad thing, and that's one thing that I'm missing. But yeah, I'm still glad that we do have channels like this that talk about classical music, because every now and then, even if it's just one person that decides, hey, I want to listen to a new genre and then falls into classical music, hey, that's still a win in my opinion, because classical music nowadays, people don't talk about it. It's it's not talked about, compared to other music or other music genres. So yeah, and also I'm trying to do my best. My channel is more about my own journey, but I feel like I've brought people on the journey with me, so that's pretty fun and pretty cool. So hey, I'll do what I can, to also push classical music out there, and I hope y'all continue to support, and I hope, yeah, y'all continue to enjoy the reactions, and I appreciate y'all for requesting this. As I said, it's always nice learning something new, and even, yeah, building on my classical knowledge. So yeah, classical fam, if you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Also go subscribe to him. I'll put the video for the link down in the description, and yeah, I might catch you on the next video.